are required to test certain controls. Then we will also, related to the audit of the federal awards, we will issue a compliance report for each major federal program and related internal control over compliance under the uniform guidance. And again, that will not be an opinion on internal control. Cincinnati Public's responsibility. The district is responsible for the preparation of the financial statements. They're responsible for internal controls over financial reporting and for state and federal compliance. The audit, we have already begun pre-planning and preparatory work in our office in July and August. On-site field work, we've scheduled to start the week of September 13th, and we'll be work on and off-site throughout October. Then come November, probably late November, around Thanksgiving, the draft of the financial statements will be available. And at that point, we will come back on site and we'll work on the audit until it's finished, which is due with the state auditor's office December 31st. So I also prepared an overview of our audit testing. I'm not going to go through all of this information. If anybody has any questions on it, I will cover one area because I know the main area that came up with this is how to coordinate between our external audit and the internal audit work done by the internal audit. And one area that was of key interest is I think the district's looking into doing some work around payroll. So just to give you an overview, our testing of payroll, we are required to identify the key controls, which we do through a walkthrough. We pull out significant controls. We do control testing on that. That's usually a sample for a control needs to be between 40 for it to be effective. And if we find any issues in that, you can test additional more to overcome that, but you really can't have any more in the additional 20 or so that you would test. Typically we come out okay on the 40, but occasionally if you find an exception, you need to do the additional. And then we do a substantive test, and that's calculated based on materiality, what's called a materiality unit. So when you look at the financial statements, there's a general fund, and then there's other major funds, and then there's non-major. So our opinion basically is on major funds and all other aggregate information. So all the non-major funds kind of get included as one big pool, the way it works. So we basically do the materiality based either on revenues or expenses, assets or liabilities within those materiality units. And we use pretty much standard industry standard sampling forms to calculate those samples. And we would have to do a certain amount of sampling in each materiality unit. You have to do so many general fund transfers. Any major funds that have payroll in it, the other aggregate sample. And that the substantive test would be more recalculating the persons in our sample, the rate times the hours or the days in the period, withholdings, retirement calculation, all of the components of that. Also, one thing we do related to payroll is what we call key personnel payroll. And auditing standards basically state that you can't overcome the risk of management override of controls because your higher level managers have the ability to subvert controls. So, and that's in any organization. So basically, we have to design an audit to also address risk. And one thing we do is do a key payroll test. So we pick out key persons like superintendent, treasurer, some of the high level positions, HR director, and then we also have some other ones that are higher level, but maybe not in group, and we'll kind of rotate some. We do the first group every year. The other ones will rotate in so many each year, and we'll change the people out. And those become more than a sample. We actually look at the entire contract year that covers our audit and make sure that the whole thing can be reconciled out. where when we're doing a sample, a lot of times we're picking X teacher payroll on October 15th. So we're looking at that individual transaction, not necessarily as a whole, but when we do the key payroll, we're looking at the whole. So if there was anything throughout the entire period that didn't agree to the source documents, contracts, board approved contracts, and so forth, we would be looking into that and obtaining answers.
I have a question for the non-auditors on the committee and in the room. If you were to come across an error in any of these testings, can you explain how you would report that to us, just so everyone has a little bit of context for that?
Okay. Well, the first thing we would do before whatever we get to the reporting level is we would go to our contacts in the payroll department. Also, we work a lot closely with Kevin Ashley in his position. So we would say, hey, we have these potential, variances. Can you obtain more information? We give you a chance to get feedback. Because sometimes we might be looking at something wrong, or maybe we had the wrong, pay schedule or something like that. So we first have to filter out, if it's truly an issue. Once it's an issue, then you have to look at materiality level. Things that are of higher materiality level, make it into the yellow book report or the audit reports on internal control or compliance. But to make it into the internal control report, most likely, unless there was an actual control exception, that would, if one of those 40, if you had a failure, you couldn't overcome it with additional testing, that would go into the yellow book report as either a significant deficiency or a material weakness. The individual, like let's say somebody was overpaid, a small amount, that probably wouldn't make it. If it was one person, we'd have to basically do where you would say if we tested this many and we had somebody overpaid by $200, what's the potential for the entire population? So assuming it's not material, that would be, brought up as like a management comment, but it probably wouldn't make it into the reports because it wouldn't be material. But the state auditors, when it comes to payroll, because it's public money, anything usually over $500 winds up being a finding for recovery. The person has to pay it. It's usually how that works.
And I might add too, we're really grateful for Kevin Bond for putting this together for us. And one of the things we were discussing as well is how we can continue to partner between external audit and internal audit, and spinning off the conversation from our June meeting as to how do we support and build upon the work that external audit does. And so our next steps as we approach this payroll project this year will be to gain a better understanding of the detailed testing that is performed by the Plattenberg team and make decisions as internal audit to say, okay, we feel comfortable in these tests. They have good results year after year. We don't need to duplicate efforts. And we might work in the peripheral and test things in a different manner or a different level of detail than is done by external audit. And conversely, if there are areas that we feel could use another set of eyes, we can kind of double down on this as the external as well. So through our partnership, great partnership with Plattenberg, we can have those conversations to best position our internal audit projects as we move forward.
Is there any other questions on any of this information or on our audit process for this upcoming year?
If I could, it's not so much of your process, but for our benefit, what's the timeline? I heard the December. What will the board need to be doing in what months as we move forward? So we can build that into the board's work.
Usually, basically, we have this meeting now. There won't probably be a lot for the board to do until later. Usually there's a request for some type of post-audit meeting that goes over the results. That would probably be, usually it winds up after the audit completed, but that usually happens probably in early January. At the earliest, probably late December. I can't remember, there's usually, we have our management representation letter. I can't remember here. I think there might be signing by the board president, but I can't say for sure. A lot of districts we do, that would be something we might need, which would be in December, probably, the last 10 days or so of December.
Is this also when, do we do any kind of a presentation in executive session first, and then somehow later on it is shared more widely with the public? So that
I don't know that we've ever shared it with the public if there's any significant findings.
yeah.
But we haven't had to do that yet.
So
It's under my tenure.
So the president of the board in January, that's going to be a new board, but part of the agenda then is the president and the superintendent work on the agenda. So we just anticipate that will have to happen in January. Exactly. Thank you.
And then we keep track from an audit committee perspective. We have our monthly checklist of all the requirements from our charter. So that's when I'll reach out to Kevin, like today was a required communication for the audit kickoff. We'll make sure in terms of the audit committee communication that we'll stay on that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if there were any audit issues, I'm sure they would be communicating with you even before we have that meeting. I'm sure there's some discussions. So you all will be made aware.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. It was good to be with everyone.
Thank you. And Dan, I might also add, so today's presentation from Kevin Bond was also the first step in our educational endeavors that we're going to start bringing forward to the audit committee. I think our June meeting raised a lot of good points around we have some new members and truly what is the difference between internal audit and external audit. So I'll share more when we get to our audit status report, but I just kind of wanted to give a nod to our intentionality of bringing some education to the committee in just bits and pieces so we can start to further utilize the group and make sure everyone's
Lauren, would you like to introduce our next group of speakers for the benefits audit recommendation update?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. I'll welcome them up to the stage. So we have Susan Bunty, our assistant superintendent, and Ross Tarko, our director of talent acquisition, as well as two of our virtual presenters. So I'll have the two of them.
So good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to participate in your meeting today. As Lauren mentioned, I'm Susan Bunty, the superintendent. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So as you all know, because you've been being informed of this process for the last year, the audit was conducted back in 2020. During that time, Paul McDowell was our Director of Human Resources, and he was leading this work for the last year or so. We then had a reorganization of our Human Resources Department, and now it falls within the auspices of talent. And so I'm the senior leader who is supporting that work. And Paul is now leading our labor relations and employee relations work stream. So as such, Lauren has been absolutely amazing in helping inform Dr. Turco, who is our Director of Talent Acquisition and Staffing, about the results of the audit and sharing with us, as did Paul, the pieces that have been accomplished so far. If we go to the next slide, please. So, in working with BKD as a partner, when Ross and I began working with them in June, we really went through and talked about what our goals were in terms of this work, and then actually put together timelines that Ross will share with you in just one moment. And then we also have data for you in terms of completion of certain audit findings thus far. So, Ross?
Hello, everybody. So I just wanted to I know we've seen this timeline before, but I just really wanted to focus where we are right now. So right now, we've just finished up our root cause analysis of our audit findings. So we're done over the last end of July, they wrapped up. We're now moving into open enrollment season, so we are really putting a lot of things in place. Part of that work is enhancing our automation of benefits sign up. We're trying to get away from the paper and move to a more online enrollment process. Developing conditions and workflow in Business Plus, which is our system of record. We're now going to be focusing on our procedures for invoicing for benefits. And we're looking at long-term solutions and recommendations. And finally, is policy decisions and structural changes. So now we're going to pass it off to Christy and Chris to kind of talk a little bit about what's been accomplished in phase 2.
Thank you. And I wanted to thank Ross and Susan for their participation in this project and the team. I'll hand it over to Chris to go through the details. If we could advance it to the next slide, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Wanted to, well, this is a little bit of a busy slide, but it kind of summarizes what has been done to date, and it speaks to the 5 topics that we have talked about on the timeline. So on the left side of the slide, you will notice that there are 5 topics listed. So the root cause analysis, we have done that, and what that was essentially looking at the audit report, and which had a lot of topics and recommendations and issues that were brought up, and trying to make sense out of it as far as finding commonalities and using that as a springboard to address the issues a little more holistically, and finding kind of common threads that we can address going forward. So this is definitely the springboard into all of the other topics. Some of them are covered by corrective action implementation. So these are the direct recommendations of the audit report, and happy to report that we are about at 40-some% completion of that. And in the next slide, I'm going to get a little granular when we move on. So you'll get details on that. Then there's benefit process improvements. We are basically getting started on the other three topics. The process improvement, just finding a better way to do things based, and a lot of it, actually a huge item, a benefit has been put forth by actually for this upcoming open enrollment period, as well as on the new employees. They are now being directed, all of them, to sign up via the online portal. There is no way for them to use paper forms or anything like that. That will be absolutely huge as far as streamlining the process. So that's a great thing that has been put into place. Automation integration, there are still some things that we need to look at, obviously being at 10%, but as far as what the system can do for us, maybe there are other solutions that are possible to just make people's lives easier. I mean, all the stakeholders, not just the folks in benefits, to enable them to do their job with a minimal amount of disruptions and errors, but also the benefit plan participants that can get a lot more out of the process, as well as the administration having a lot more visibility as to what happens. And lastly, we're going to look at policy adjustments. There's some things that have already been put forth, and it's just, these are decisions that the people in benefits, or certainly not the consultants, but there are things that need to be addressed as far as decisions that need to be made on how to address things moving forward in order to streamline. The right side kind of presents the same information a little bit in a different way, and it just goes to progress and to number of issues. So the root cause had 30 items, and then they flowed into other areas. The corrective action has 16, and we're tracking all of these as we go forward. So, and I'm going to pause here, ask if there's any questions on this slide. This is a lot of information. And if not, we'll move forward. I wanted to show you the next slide, which has, please. Yeah, and this is the progress on the corrective action. So as you see, there's quite a bit that's been done. Just about everything is underway. There's one item that has yet to get out of the blocks, and actually we have meeting schedules on that item. But 15 out of 16 items are underway. 5 out of 16 are nearing completion. 1 is complete. And when I say nearing completion, you'll notice that towards the end, there's 5 items that are at 90% complete. The difference between 90 and 100% complete is that the BKD team has to validate and make sure that the item works. It works in a fashion that can be repeatable, and it also addresses the issues that were raised in the audit report. So basically, on all those items, the fix has been put into place, and it's just making sure that it is a good one. All of the other items are a little bit, in the middle, and as far as I can tell, everything is on track, and most are targeted to be completed by the end of October.
Yeah, and I would just add, thank you, Chris. Just to summarize, as far as the timeline, we are in progress. The timeline is on schedule as far as the timeline that was presented at the beginning of this project. A number of things are underway, and I just want to reiterate that as things are completed or marked completed, then BKD, as the project manager, will conduct validation procedures on those corrective actions to make sure that, number one, they were implemented as intended, and that they are mitigating the risk of errors that were noted previously, or mitigating the risk of the root cause and the condition that existed previously. So really happy with the progress that has been made to date. We are continuing to track this at a task level and then at a higher level as well by category.
So that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
At the conclusion of the project, which I guess based on the timeline is somewhere near the end of the year with the long-term recommendations and policy decisions, should we expect a deliverable of kind of everything on it with a bow on it, so to speak? And so I guess our next meeting is October 27th, and then our next one will be sometime in January, I presume?
Mid-December.
Okay. I'm just thinking kind of out from here and expecting what kind of updates we would have. And I don't think we need to make any decisions today or make any expectations today, but the audit committee is interested in conclusion of this, recommendations, deliverables, and everything else, given the time that has passed since the audit was originally concluded. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was excited to hear about new employees being required to fill these out on forms. Is there options for employees who may not have access to technology?
Yeah, we do have access. So they're got an employee center so that they can come up here. We do have paper that is available upon.
Just second what you said about finishing it, deliverables and having us include.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Lauren, the floor is yours for the
Great.
audit status report.
Thank you. So next document is labeled audit status report. And I'm going to be very brief unless you have questions and you'd like me to go into the area. So just be mindful of our time today. So on the first page, if we scroll down under fiscal year 2022 internal audit plan, there are a couple items to note. You'll see that the internal audit plan was updated after our last meeting and emailed out to the committee, I believe, on July 13th. So I just went ahead and included it for ease of reference. The main changes, of course, as we discussed earlier, were the change to adding a payroll engagement. And on pages 12 and 13 of the audit report, you'll see, or the audit plan, pardon me, you'll see the removal of projects that leave space for the hours that are now being attributed and over to our payroll. So that's more of a housekeeping item, but we are certainly well underway in the plan. And in terms of those hours, we had discussed the need for additional support through co-sourcing in order to support the execution of each item from the audit plan. So I'm pleased to share that we actually at Monday's board meeting, the board was kind to approve our request and contract for Guidehouse Inc. Guidehouse was actually brought to us by one of our committee members, as Guidehouse is an audit firm and professional services firm that specializes in public sector and specifically school district clients. So they have provided co-sourcing to other urban districts, and we really look forward to their expertise. This is a change from us. Historically, we have used BDO, and I think this is a great opportunity to utilize the unique resources available through our partnership with Guidehouse. So we are well underway in beginning those conversations as to what areas that they will support and what areas we will execute, but of course everything will be led and owned by the CPS Internal Audit Department. So as I mentioned, I'm not going to go through and read each of these areas. I think that their summary is nice. I think they give a bit of progress since our last update, but ultimately, since only 2 months have passed since we passed the plan, there's not significant, items to note aside from us beginning our kickoff meetings, scoping things out, and beginning the engagements as noted. The final item to note is the last page of this document are the updates on internal audits. So you'll see the ODE project under in progress. So if you don't mind scrolling to page 4, please. Thank you. You will see a summary of what's in progress and what has been completed. Always positive news to share when our completed audits are all in compliance. So I don't believe that there's anything additional. So any questions or areas that I could further expand upon before moving on? Very good. A couple minutes there.
Yes, I will.
Oh, I'm sorry, Christine.
Kind of a follow-up to last meeting's conversation that may be missing on the audit plan is how we better enable you and the team and for next year, and what type of time and engagement that might need with both internal leadership as well as this organization and the board. And so I'm wondering if we need to incorporate that in some way into the audit report of, we're sort of not going to get to a place where we're planning the year really thinking about risks, and that's where we're choosing to then go and do our internal plan. If we don't build in time to do that risk assessment and leave that with the organization. So don't know if I have my thoughts formally together yet on it, but I just thought we should start thinking about that as part of your work.
Don't we kind of do that on the multi-year audit cycle kind of thinking a little bit more forward than just here and now. And it's obviously the future is very subject to change. We probably never adhere to exactly what we planned years in advance. But Christine, does that help you get to where you think we should be?
No, to me, it's Lauren needs hours out of her plan to be able to better engage with the CPS leadership on risk assessment so that then they can make that 1 and 3 year plan. It's the actual process of how do we determine what goes in these squares that I think has been missing of like a real robust process of engagement to determine that.
So we've during various audit committee meetings, Christine and I have discussed, ultimately where we would like to go will take organization participation, and really that's the weakness that we are going to have until we get to that point. So the weaknesses that we have when we perform our risk assessment is that it's Isaac and I having conversations. While we might have 100 conversations with 100 different people, it's Isaac and I interpreting what that means in terms of their risk tolerance, what they see are challenges, and then Isaac and I taking our time in risk ranking those. While we use a thorough methodology, we have some clear criteria that we share with our plan every year. It is limited in the sense that we don't have the same perspective as our Board of Education, as our audit committee, and as our other senior leaders. And so what we'll see in other organizations, P&G is always one that has stood out to me because I think after I went to an IA training one year, I think Ms. Bolton and I may have discussed it as well. Other larger organizations, they have a risk management office. And so it becomes this kind of Venn diagram of overlap. So you have like your management circle, your internal audit circle, and your risk management circle. And how those three things partner is that each person plays a unique role. And I think the piece that we miss in this organization at times, unless we're very intentional in it, is that development of the risk management that incorporates the perspective of both internal audit and management, helps rank things. Because I think that something that would be very helpful for us is to understand, as internal auditors, to understand is what is our organizational risk tolerance and risk appetite, and where are those areas that exceed that appetite. And those areas then would rise to the top and allow us to better address and target those things. So while we do that in our limited environment, and I hope I'm capturing this correctly, until we get the further levels of engagement, we will never have that level of perspective. So that is a larger journey, and it is a larger.
Yes, other than potentially building it into your plan, are there other things that we as an audit committee help support that movement for the organization towards more of a risk assessment process?
So I would be interested in the board and, of course, Jen, your perspective. I know some organizations, we maybe even had thought through this, is some other organizations will bring in like a consulting group. Well, I can tell you about risk management. I'm not a risk manager, I'm an auditor, so it would be, if that is the preference of the board and the audit committee and senior leadership, if that would be a journey of documenting. The first year is always a large undertaking, so even documenting what are the top critical risks. And maybe PLT has already started down this path to some degree, since I know PLT has been very risk-minded and very strategic. So perhaps we already have a starting point, but I don't know that, I might defer to other leaders to say the best next steps, bringing consulting or in homegrown.
I would say, since we've never formally gone through a risk management analysis as the district, we just kind of we're more reactive in that respect. That we would start off with a consultant and do a workshop on this scenario with the leadership team, and several board members wanted to participate. Because right now, I doubt anybody on the academic side of the house would even understand. So it's kind of a heavy lift right now. But certainly, it would certainly make us stronger, and it might help inform some of our investments, budgetary investments.
Yeah, I think it's needed. Most educational systems are, to Jen's point, reactive, trying to get through each day. Obviously, I think if we had a risk management office or whatever, we could have been much clearer about the risk management and the risk we're all taking with our children right now in transportation. This is a disaster from a risk management situation. So, yeah, it's a good way to think and rank that risk and really look at risk from all phases of what the district does, whether it's investments or whether it's instruction or whatever operation, risk of enrollment, or dropping. I think it's a good thing to do. And I think you're right to start with a consulting group.
Kind of a proof of value before.
Exactly.
It'll be a budget fight.
Mm-hmm.
It is I mean, having gone through governance training at Procter & Gamble, where they trained us on how to do some of these risk assessments, it was a real mind shift change for me of how do we assess risk, and it's not, there are multiple vectors that you need to do that on. It's how quickly would you be able to respond if this event occurred? What do you need? How big is it monetary-wise risk? How big is it safety, reputational? And so they have real frameworks that can help organizations, including people who are not familiar with this stuff, go through it. And so I know we don't have quorum today, but I mean, I would be ready as an audit committee perhaps for us to be making this recommendation that the CPS administration engage with a consultant to do a risk assessment. We can't vote on that, but I would hope other members of the audit committee would be supportive.
Laura, can you add that to the agenda for the October meeting?
Absolutely.
We can have a formal discussion and vote.
We can do some research on organizations that are out there and maybe some cost analysis.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, and I think that really is the critical next step. And that's why when I present my plan, sometimes we say, okay, how do we link those top 10 budget units to what we ultimately select? And we're like, well, it's kind of an art, and I know that's not the best, that's not our final destination. That's not where we hope to land. And I think this work will be critical to getting more scientific in our selection of our. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, any more comments?
I just wonder if there might be some, I don't know if you guys can hear me, if there might be some risk assessment standards for school districts in Ohio or around the country where there's some other information that could be used as benchmarking.
So the Council of Great City Schools that we're a member of does have risk management services, and just as they gather the CFOs together, as gather the risk managers together. So not every district has them. I think it's kind of a new concept. And so we'll certainly reach out to the council for guidance.
Yeah. And we actually have reached out to a few other internal audit groups in the Council of Greater City Schools organization. And we have received a few, maybe a handful of other districts' risk assessment. And I think we kind of found that ours was already a little more robust than what they had. And so I think that's why we never really got to expand on anything, because ours was already, thanks to Lauren, much more complex. And, with us being financially minded people, we can go through the financial risk assessment quick, and then we get to the functional risks of the district, and that's when we have to kind of go out and try to get a gauge of, the academic side, what the risks are, because neither of us have a very strong, any strong knowledge around those areas. And so, of course, people kind of back away from the auditors, and everybody tries to make it seem like everything's fine and dandy. And so, definitely bringing in an outside firm, I think, would be great to put some, more knowledge around that area.
So we do have pockets of this. For example, we have a cybersecurity person now that's internal, and so these focused on our network risk and cyber risk and stuff like that, but it's not formed, and then we don't have an organization that's just formed, because we do, like you said, we all know the financial risk, and I know a lot about the operational side of the house, so I can lend that, but it's not a good formal thing, and so, I think we're pretty ripe for this, it's a great suggestion.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's the inputs that we need. So like from an audit perspective, I feel like we can plug and chug with whatever determinations are made, but right now it's limited to our perspective. So I think it is an enormous opportunity.
So if the audit committee can make it in October, make a formal recommendation, it will certainly help the budget battles move forward. Get funded.
Okay, if there's no more comments there, we can move on to the change in job title discussion.
Or does Ms. Golden start? It doesn't.
I will. None? So based on the conversation we had at the last audit committee, some other underlying conversations, we determined that the director was not an appropriate role for Lauren. She initially started as internal auditor when there was just one of them, but when Isaac joined the team, then she needed to have some kind of a supervisory title. Our administrative union, the top of that union is typically the director title. But because Lauren is a direct report to the board and has chief level responsibilities, with research from Lauren, she helped do the research, but I'm wanting to make a recommendation. We talked to Finance Committee last week of changing her title to Chief Audit Executive, and it gives her a lot more authoritative reaction, acceptance. I'm not sure what the right word is, but power, thank you. And certainly the respect that her office deserves.
Thank you. So I brought forth some documents, as Ben mentioned. This was mentioned it at the June 19th board meeting and during the presentation of the minutes. I thought it may be helpful to bring forth initially to Finance Committee and of course now to Audit Committee. What would it entail if we were to pursue this in terms of logistics and considerations, as I want the board, the Finance and Audit Committee to see the full extent of this decision. And so what you'll see there is a memo summarizing the background, but you'll also see on the second page of the memo, we spoke with General Counsel to see if there are some additional considerations. There won't be a significant impact on the employment terms aside from a determination in making this a senior management level position. And that was, from my understanding, the feeling of the Finance Committee. They were in support of making this a senior management position, as the proposition is this, well, as the position currently reports to the Board of Education. So you'll see two attached documents, one of which is the board policy that governs the internal audit charter. So the impact that this decision would make are the red line edits, as you can see. They are rather simple in terms of the first page, just purely being a change in title. And then I actually just spoke with General Counsel Hoyne again today, and he advised, he actually made these edits on the final page of the policy, the red line edits, that this verbiage would be what would be needed to accurately represent that decision of senior management level position. You can see there those edits. And then, of course, with the change in Talent and Human Resources, we made that final edit a more broad statement, not necessarily related. And the final document you'll have in front of you is the benchmarking study from 2019, the Council of Great City Schools. I know we like to be a leader among our peers in the Council of Great City Schools. So you'll see I just went through and highlighted the organizations that currently have a chief audit executive as their primary leader of the department, and summarize those at the very top so we can see if this decision were to be made, this would be in alignment, certainly with best practices and in our. So these are just points of consideration for the committee as they move forward through the discussion today.
And to follow that up tomorrow, if this pleases the audit committee, which doesn't require a decision about this, but if the audit committee, believes that this kind of reflects the dialogue that's been taking place, then tomorrow at a 9 o'clock policy meeting, this draft will be approved by the policy committee, because it is a board policy with the charter and what have you. So then it'll go, after that, it will go to the board on, I think, the 13th, because I don't think we could vote on the 1st, but on the 13th. So all that will be done. It will have hit all the areas and the timeline and the pipeline and what have you. And then
So this is Carol Mitchell Lawrence. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
yeah.
So,
Yes.
question for you. Is the manager's position an exempt or non-exempt position?
Are you referring to my position, Ms. Lawrence?
The position that was posted, not your position, Lauren.
Oh, so essentially all positions within the internal audit department are unrepresented, correct? So there is an administrator's union, and for independence, my position, Isaac's position, as well as the position that's currently vacant are unrepresented.
But are they classified as an exempt employee or non-exempt?
Yeah, we don't really use that classification, exempt versus non-exempt.
Okay, so it's basically federal guidelines on how you classify employees, right? Whether or not they're overtime eligible or not overtime eligible. And then it goes into the amount of work that you can physically do in that role versus a supervisory role. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that as we fill these roles, that we ensure that the work that we're intending to be done as we give these titles out, that they're actually fitting the role that we're expecting them to, the work that we're expecting them to do.
Yeah, these do not earn overtime, so they're salaried employees.
So that would be something that would concern me, is that who are the people that's actually doing the work?
So the internal audit department work is executed by myself and Isaac, as well as this vacancy, which we hope to fill. Does that help answer the question?
It does. It just concerns me that when you look at, and it could be different for educational purposes in school, but it concerns me that for a manager in my organization, right, there is a limit to the amount of physical work that you can do versus how many people you need to be supervising that's doing the work.
Oh, no, we don't have any of that. So Isaac and I sometimes find ourselves doing the same task. So I would say, while I'm a strategic leader, I hope that the supervisor will be hiring is plays that supervisory role to some degree. I think we have a good team methodology, and we don't have any limitations due to human resources that would prevent anyone from doing any type of task. And we're very mindful to write our job descriptions in a way that allows us to utilize a team member for whatever the current need is, and people are expected to step up and deliver and perform at a high level. And at times of the year we'll be very busy, and at times of the year, we only will be doing 5 hours over what our expectations are. But it's all salaried, and I think our team rises to the occasion and executes the work as needed.
All job descriptions go through a compliance check through our talent HR department, and because they have to be civil service compliant as well. So there's always, people just can't make up their own jobs and titles.
I get it. Yesterday, I found out in 2008, there was a big job reclassification that the federal government made us all go through. And people who were classified as managers and so on, when they looked at the work that they were required to do, didn't line up with the title that they had. So as long as we're comfortable and it's been vetted out, then that's just my question. It doesn't seem to line up with what our industry.
I just wanted to, there's a lot of feedback. I don't know if you've got a few lines coming in or something, but just a heads up, because it's at least on here, I can't hear the specifics of what you're saying.
Mr. Messer.
Yes, sorry, I'm getting the feedback as well. I think probably when multiple lines are not muted. So I'll just save my question.
Okay, so just as a matter of procedure, we don't have quorum, but I don't think at this point we're being asked to recommend to support this change because the finance committee, it's a finance committee decision as a committee of the board. So seeing that, I don't think we really need to do anything further unless anyone else from the audit committee has any questions or observations. Is
No,
that fair?
because the audit committee sent this to the finance committee. So that part of what you were doing is done. Finance committee reviewed it, thinks it's a good idea, and then we now, finance then, upon your going ahead with this, we assigned it to policy to make the changes.
Okay, and if there's no more questions or observations on that, we can move on to the financial updates from Ms. Wagner.
This is Liz. I have a quick comment and question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I just noticed in looking through the exhibit of the other districts that there aren't very many districts that have both the chief audit executive and the director. So I think that is a good argument for changing the position, in that, you know, there's not typically necessarily directors reporting to the chief executive. The only question I wanted to ask is maybe what is an example of some of the other, let's see, what are they called? Some of the other senior management level positions that would be, or chief level positions that would be sort of parallel to this new title, or would have like be in that similar like benefits tier.
So the people that are on the senior leadership team, which is now called the performance leadership team, are all the superintendent's direct reports. But we have a chief of strategy and operations. We have a chief information officer. I think that's, the rest are assistant superintendents.
Communications.
Chief of communications, thank you. Legal counsel.
And are those typically people that report directly to the board?
No, they all report directly to the superintendent. The board has 3 direct reports, which is the treasurer, the superintendent, and the internal auditor.
Okay. Okay, I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ready?
Yes.
That's just in case you don't know who I am, but this is like a public template. So 2 things today to talk about today. One is the financial status of fiscal year 21, the audit results. Typically, Kevin does these presentations, but he's on a much needed vacation. And so I just have a very high level. I think Lauren has already submitted his reports electronically, so you have his level of detail. And then we're going to talk about the budget that was just approved for this year. Oops. So here's my slide on last year. The good news is revenues were up, expenses were down, our cash balance is up, and our open encumbrances stayed relatively about the same. The math will not work across the thing because remember the temporary movement of advances for the other funds that can't be in the deficit until we get reimbursed. So the difference is the advances and transfers. Revenues were up. We got a little bit of the state revenue back that they were cut the previous year, but almost half of it. Some of our CRA are the Community Reinvestment Act agreements are up in terms of revenues. Expenses, well, we were blended and hybrid for part of the year, so we just didn't have the transportation costs that we have for utilities, and a lot of our outsourced contracts didn't come to fruition. So that the positive news was it gives us $8 million more in cash to start this year with. So switching to, oh goodness, very sensitive. Are you doing that beyond or mine? Okay. So our experience was another challenge this year because we had several things come in at one time. Was the ESSER fund that came with all the requirements it came to. We had a state budget that was adopted on June 28th, the day I was presenting to the board and what our budget was. So that had some significant changes to our budget plan. And then we're required to do a lot of public engagement on our ESSER, the 3-year plan. And the board was very insistent, and rightly so was I, that we spent some time addressing, you remember the cliff slide, addressing what that would look like and how we're going to handle all that. And then so I went through several presentations to the board and in the public on June and July. And we did a thought exchange to get feedback from our public, and the board finally Monday night adopted. So here's the challenges. We had the state budget impact that I spoke about before. So this budget was also supposed to fund the 3rd year of a strategic plan. And then we have this initiative called New Shore. So under this new normal that we live in, how did we need to change or invest in new things, different things, to help our students move forward? So that's the New Shore initiatives. And then we knew that this year we were returning back to normal, what we thought would be normal operations from COVID. So back to face-to-face every day, classroom instruction. And then the long-term view was just because we have this $300 million grant, we were trying to be very wise in what we put in the grant or kept in the general fund so that we were trying to maximize the smartest way to invest those things. We were trying to keep that 3-year plan in our brain as we were developing this year's budget. And all that was done based on guesstimates of what was going to happen with our enrollment, how many students were going to come back to us and grow, and what was what our COVID experience going to be like this the first months of school, like we were going to be able to open. So there's a lot of projections. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the state impact. So if you recall, the state budget supports that green pie chart on all of our general revenues, which is about $210 million. So any big change to that would have a significant impact on our ability to fund our classroom. And so the major changes that came in under House bill, and so remember they're reviewing House bill and Senate bill, and they were wildly different in their formulas. So it was really hard to figure out what was going to happen. But the two major things that happened was they took all the direct funding tuition out of our budget, which is a good thing. So our revenues are going to go down, and our expenses are also going to go down. The tuition expense, the pass-through tuition. That was a big one. And then they decided to put the student wellness money back into the general fund. So when they first started the student wellness almost 3 years ago, they made us put it into a whole separate fund, state fund, grant number, like a totally separate bank account, so to speak. Now they decided to make us put it back in the general fund. So our forecast is going to look all bizarre again because we got all this money coming back. Now, the first piece of information we received from ODE was that we were going to get $15 million this year, almost $17 or $18 million the following year in the student wellness. The Senate version was going to take us down to $10 million this year. That was a little freaked out. Then they came and said, okay, no, we'll just give you what you got this year, which is $12.5 million. So even a $15 million budget had to be carved down to $12.5 million. And now I've since learned, because we're going through all these simulations, that the student wellness money will be subject to our state share, which is now dropped from 46% to 43%. We got wealthier in this formula. So we're still trying to work through some of those details, but the general fund revision, originally on June 28th, we presented a $676 million budget. So got the $80 million in tuition, and I added back the $12.5 million in student wellness. But we're trying to figure out. I'm confident some of our carryover money will cover the difference.
Hi. On the estimated tuition removal, what is that based on? And do you think it's essentially favorable for us or unfavorable for us for it to be done in this moment?
Well, if you think about the complaint that we've had where remember we used to get $4,000 per child in the state funding formula, but they deducted 7,500 kids per charter school. If they're not going to take the 7,500 dollars per kid, but we're still going to get even if we stayed at 4,000, it would still be a better deal for us. So I've gone through some simulations. It's really hard to watch it to reconcile it from the old formula to the new formula. But we're going to be we're taking most of the September Finance Committee to walk through the formulas the board and the public can challenge. The base costs are being funded based on either your last year's enrollment or the average of the last 3 years, whichever is higher. And for us, it'll be the 3-year average because every school district dropped last year. The categoricals where they do weighting on special needs, ELL, gifted, and economically disadvantaged are based on the current year's enrollment. So we need to make sure that all of our files that go up to the state are as full and accurate as that'll have an impact. They're not going to show us the impact of this state formula until October. So we're probably going to have to do some kind of budget revision mid-year based on that because we're all still trying to learn all the little intricacies that are in there. A challenge. But so, any more questions about that? Okay. The data that I based that on was based on, we took last year's experience and then what I projected to be the new year's tuition. So I took that out of the budget, but I took the revenue out from what they said. Okay, so remember, building the budget, strategic year 3. So if you recall our strategic plan that was built by the community and the community invested, was centered on student-centered decision-making, health and safety, community engagement, optimized capabilities, and growth. Now, what we had to do, so we funded our 3rd year, and you can see those, I won't read them out to you, but those shaded areas in blue were things that we had to enhance because of COVID. For example, we brought in 26 more school social workers because of the social and emotional need of our students through COVID and the trauma that came about. We added $5.5 million for a nursing, a nurse in every building. Now, we heard in public the other night about schools having to share nurses, and it's because they have vacancies. It's not because they're not budgeted. They're fully funded, just they have vacancies, so people are having to cover vacant schools, so they're sharing time. The Walnut Hills Dome. So Walnut Hills, originally when the FMP was funded for 1,900 students, and they have over 3,000. And so social distancing became quite a big challenge for them. So what we're doing is putting a dome over the tennis court to add another cafeteria and some instructional spaces. Because Walnut Hills, the classrooms are tiny. But there's also an expansion budget as part of our 3-year ESSER. So moving to the new shore initiatives, I won't read all this up. They call these behind. But under student decision making, there was a couple of things that influenced our new shore. So we had the racial unrest that happened and COVID that happened. And so we took some board direction and community input, and we started investing in African American studies and expanding our world languages, maximizing outdoor learning, and trying to get the night school program together, adding American Sign Language as a foreign language. Adding 45 reading specialists to focus on the 3rd grade reading guarantee. So these 45, there's a 1st grade reading specialist at every school helping to focus on reading. We expand our instrumental music, and I think it was 18 buildings, if I'm not mistaken. What else am I missing? We spent a lot of time and research on concurrent learning. What that means is I'm a teacher in a classroom, half my kids are in my classroom learning face-to-face, and the other part are at home dialing in. It became a huge challenge for the classroom teacher. And at one point, we estimated it would cost us about $52 million in investment on network technology equipment in the classrooms. And it's a good thing we decided not to move forward because the state in the House Bill 110 said all remote learners have to be attached to one iPhone. So we even now have had to split our virtual high school and Cincinnati Digital Academy into 2 separate schools. So we would have invested a lot of money and not been able to use it because we're not doing concurrent learning the way we envisioned it.
Jen, could I just add to that? Because I think this is sort of historic, but all that research and effort has rendered a really cool thing that we're trying to pursue, which is to have at least in every school a space that would allow us to have kind of that concurrent technology, which I think will radically change community engagement.
Yes.
where the LSDMCs are, able to be tapped in, where anything special at a particular school is taking place, maybe a guest lecture or or a piano recital or what have you. It can be in that space and the community can participate that way. I think that might be really evolutionary for us. Very much so.
Thank you for reminding us that $10.5 million in the bottom honeycomb there is to help get that
exactly
concurrent area, technology area for every building. I also failed to mention our investment in a diversity office. So we used to have a supplier diversity department when we were doing the facility master plan, all tied to construction. But the board encouraged us to create a diversity office that could focus on diversity and equity throughout all of our operations. We're very excited. Some more of the new shore. These are things that are related to the health and safety and engagement. We're heavily invested in preparing and protecting our students with a lot of cleaning supplies, masks, disinfectant, isolation rooms, some additional Wi-Fi devices. And they are now handing out new students their one-on-one device. We're rolling all that out now. So this is what we ended up with. Now I'm moving into the ESSER 3-year plan. It was a huge undertaking. And I just want to remind everybody that we don't have $300 million sitting in a bank account. We have to spend the money and then ask for reimbursement. So we have to be very careful about cash flow. But ESSER 2 is the blue column. That was a $93 million. And so this is how we have it allocated up the different categories. Student academic needs, a lot of it's curricular-based evidence. Some of ESSER 2 and 3 we use to help balance the general fund for things that we cut during COVID but needed to bring back, such as elementary sports and extracurricular activities. $7 million of transportation services is being funded by ESSER. And then so we had things that were one-time expenses and things that were recurring expenses. And if they were recurring through 24, what are we going to do about when the money goes away? So we actually have a plan that addresses line by line how we're going to phase things out, we're going to continue them, or reduce them, or find alternate funding source, or they're coming back to the general fund. So of the 92 million that we're using, a lot of the student academic needs is also the summer scholars program. We spent $15 million this summer supporting learning loss. And we're going to have a similar plan for next summer. After that, we'll probably return to our former or something different summer school, but it won't be code unless things change. Then we have to change. But we have the ability to modify this plan. We're not stuck with it. So as things change, the variant gets worse, a new one comes, we have to shut down, and then we'll have to readjust our plan. So that's my cliff. You guys remember this from the one training that we had over there? So we do have a cliff plan. The board was insistent that we figured this out before they adopted the budget so that we weren't investing in things that were around and cut or get pressure to bring it back to the general fund unnecessarily. So we did, the leadership team went through line by line, meeting after meeting. We spent a godly amount of hours on this, but it was a really good experience for us. In that we went through each line and determined those rules. So this is where it sits right now. So $6.2 million is already coming off the top of next year's budget. That's coming back. We don't have much happening in fiscal year 24, so the next thing we need to do is look at that big chunk of money that's coming back in the third year and figure out if we can phase it in sooner to make that cliff a little bit softer there. But one example is the $5.5 million that we invested in nurses. At the end of the ESSER plan, what are we going to do with that nursing contract? Are we going to go back to the old way of splitting nurses between schools? Are we going to keep nurses in our buildings? Those questions we have to answer. So in kind of a summary of this whole budget is staffing that we changed. So if you do a little color coding there, anything in yellow is funded by ESSER. What's red is funded by the Student Wellness Fund, which is now being dumped in the general fund. And then anything in white text is either general fund or school-wide pool. And so we've added a significant amount of staff because of our strategic initiatives, because of New Shore, because of COVID. So things that were directly impacted by COVID were the 45 redo specialists that are there in yellow and the 163 super subs. So we used to have budgets for daily subs and long-term subs that would fill for long-term maternity leave. But we instead of having daily subs split from 65 different buildings and carrying viruses amongst all those, we actually allocated 163 subs for each building so that they would stay within that building and help for teacher absences due to COVID. Last year we experienced a lot of absence because of quarantine. So we'll monitor that as we go. Kind of pause there and see if anybody has any questions. It's kind of a really fast summary, and Ms. Bolton and Mr. Messer have probably seen this presentation 100 times. Questions?
I have a question about the 80-some million coming right off the top, for the charters and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
What does that include?
So that's the Ed Choice vouchers, the Peterson Scholarship, the Autism Scholarship, and the community schools, and now open enrollments. The open enrollment kids weren't supposed to be part of that, but now they are. So what happens is the kids that are coming to us from open enrollment are now considered our kids, and they're going to be part of our base funding.
Okay. So within that, then we still are assuming the responsibility for the transportation of all those folks from our remaining budget.
Yes.
Thank you.
We, if I'm not mistaken, and this might be an old number, but we used to spend about $8 million transporting non-CPS kids a year.
Now it's a bit more, but who knows?
I don't know. We'll have to see what this plays out.
I think it's worth noting that at the most recent Council of Critics Schools meeting we went to, this topic was actually a big concern for all of the internal auditors. And from the sounds of it, no one is nearly as planned as CPS around the cliff, or I think they were referring to as doomsday when this ESSER funding was going to go away. So great to see that you clear first place.
And we did get that same feedback from ODE just a week or so ago, because initially when we had put the addendum to ABC back into the budget to bring the elementary sports back, they rejected it, and they rejected it, and rejected it. And so I explained in writing, and I said, you know what, get them on the phone, I want to talk to them. So I verbally explained what it was we were doing. They're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So it really upset my staff because they felt like they didn't want me to think they weren't fighting the fight for me. But it's like, I don't know if it's just them having the treasure challenge of thinking and they're open to it, or the rules are kind of evolving as they go. And the instructions are evolving as they go. So it could just be that. So, yes.
The cash flow management of this has really got to be challenging, that you spend the money and wait for reimbursement. I mean, how close are we going to be on things like payroll and other operating expenses that you absolutely cash flow for because of it? And are any of your partners and treasurers working towards lobbying? Like, do you see that being one of the changes that might happen? I just see that being,
So I meet weekly with the big urban treasurers. Cleveland, Toledo, Akron, Columbus, and I call them Jen and the men. And we talk about all this stuff. And we meet with the director of finance from ODE on a regular Karen Roush, because our needs are unique. I mean, I know the suburbans and the rurals are probably even harder to have cash flow issues than we are. But we're monitoring it, and we'll continue to lobby for our needs. But mostly, ODE reimburses us fairly quickly. Now, because when ESSER first started, they fell behind. There was about $10 million we had to wait on for a while. But monthly, we're getting reimbursement. So as long as we don't have like this humongous bill in 1 month, but with our cash reserves right now, I think we'll be okay. Good question. Thank you.
Could the reimbursement be done based on commitment of the expense before it's paid?
No, it's after the fact.
is it possible to work with a bank and get a line of credit if the guarantee of reimbursement is strong?
I don't know. I know there's a state loan fund. I don't know about a line of credit with the bank, but it's something that's worth researching, being prepared in case we ever find ourselves in that way. Thank you.
There's no other questions?
I will add to the fact that not only did ODE think we're pretty smart, or Ray City Schools thought it was pretty smart, but even more importantly, 700 thought we were pretty smart, meaning the radio folks that usually go after us were at least 3 different programming setups in the early morning and noon. Said, wow, oh, well, that's good that you are thinking about that. We didn't think you'd think about that. So thanks so much. That backhanded compliment.
Yeah. You know, I didn't take that thought about, because you guys are so far ahead of everybody else in the way you're doing things, and that was nice to hear from ODE.
Okay. Let's move on to our next topic, which is the transportation update. Now, yes, Ms. Bolton.
Yes, and this will be very quick, just to make sure that the audit committee is aware of how this debacle has occurred. We know that our transportation director was at his peak now. Met every month for the last 6 months with the finance committee and reported, and never once reported any of what he was actually doing, apparently, with the Metro folks. And the important part there is that there was oversight. However, would say that the collusion, frankly, between Metro and CPS about finding a way to get rid of the extra routes to benefit the business plan of Metro was something that was arranged somewhere in June, even as Mr. Johnson was reporting that last 6 months to us. And on July 1, it was determined between Metro and Mr. Johnson that the extra routes would be eliminated and that Mr. Johnson would not be telling the leadership of the district or the board. We know that on July 8th, Mr. Johnson did tell both our chief strategic officer and also our superintendent. And the reason that that happened in part was it had to, but more particularly, it was presented to Mr. Johnson and then to both our interim superintendent and our chief strategic officer, as this was all that Metro could do, that there were no options, and the justification was the labor shortage of bus drivers. Keep in mind that Metro is still in collective bargaining negotiations with their transit folks. So this is one of those perfect storms. When the board found out about this, it was July 19th, which is clearly too long of a delay to tell the board about something significant. But again, we're in the change of administrations and who knows how that all works out. The board immediately expressed no interest in the plan and ordered the end of a planned press conference that was going to be happening in 2 days to show how we were all happy and collaborating together. And then the board held 2 more meetings and came to the resolution itself that this Metro plan was not good for us and it would be bad for our families and our kids. We met with the Metro leadership, 2 board members, and our interim superintendent, met with board members of SORTA and their chief executive officer. And at the end of that meeting, it was that it was impossible to return or restore the routes, but maybe we could find some changes that might make things safer. And so a working group was put together to try to do that. We have now gone through 5 days of school. The biggest problem so far, generally across the board, has not only been the inconvenience to hundreds and thousands, if you will, people and families, but the greatest problem is dismissal, and it's not working. And the board is, in this meeting today, telling you some things that, we're concerned. We never approved this. We have been held hostage by a monopoly that is tax supported. And we will be talking about the fact that the metric plan runs counter to our board policies. It is a great increase of risk for our families and our kids. And that that's the policy meeting tomorrow, and then there will be a committee of the whole on September 1st. And having spoken with Vice President Messer, who now, because of Mrs. Jones being on medical leave, he is going to be talking to the superintendent about the entire committee of the whole next Wednesday being completely about transportation, which includes our Vision Zero, which includes our policies, which includes data that we're looking at to show that this is not successful. And so there's a shift in that. And this is very serious. It's likely that the complete restoration won't happen. It's also very disappointing that the SORTA board has done nothing to redirect or even have reconsideration of their administrative recommendations. The elected bodies, both the council and the commission, with the exception of Alicia Reese, those folks that appoint that sort of board have been completely silent. So we are right now standing alone on this, but I think determined to make adjustments or demand adjustments. And finally, the board, in making those adjustments, really are thinking in terms of this must be changed no later, and certainly before daylight savings time, because the risk, again, it just doubles. So that's a consideration. We also know that our teachers union, our Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, I hope that I've mentioned to the chair that this would be a possibility, but I have invited, just to give the perspective of our unions, or at least our teachers union, the kind of impact this is having instructionally and on the school day, which is contracted. It's a contractual arrangement, and they have been, as you know, protesting and attempting to capture the attention of people to get this done. So Julie Sellers is here. She knows we're at the end of our meeting, but I think it's important, since this is a community committee, to hear from our teachers and president.
Well, one of the things I wanted to come and speak to the audit committee because of the risks that are potentially going to happen. My concern is that with all of these disruptions, most students in high school, it is taking them on transit an hour to an hour and a half to get to school if they make their connections. There are kids who are being left at bus stops in between. Today we had kids who reported to teachers, I couldn't come to school because the bus did not come. There was no bus for me to catch at where I had to transfer. Everybody in the schools is working all hands on deck, but it is not something that is sustainable. Kids are getting to school 30, 40, 50 minutes prior to the start of the school day. They're coming in the building a half an hour before teachers are even reporting to duty. There are many spaces within the building where things happen. After school, teachers are volunteering and some to do extra duties after school, monitoring students, because previously there was a logistical plan of how students dismissed. Buses would line up right before dismissal. There would be administrators, teachers, security, all those people out there. They would put all the kids on the buses, kids would just go their own way. You go to Walnut Hills, there are lines down Blair to Montgomery Road that are almost a mile long for cars being picked up, to pick up students or drop students off. Going down Victory Parkway, there's lines of cars all the way to Xavier University. There are families who are in a panic of, I have to get to work, you have to get out and walk the rest of the way. There are kids crossing Montgomery Road, there are kids crossing Victory Parkway, there are kids crossing Glenway Avenue, and every other major thoroughfare within the whole city. There are not crosswalks in all of those locations. They're dismissing kids at West High, and they have to take, some kids have to walk all the way up to Glenway Avenue, past all of the businesses to try to catch buses. They're crossing major thoroughfares. And so it worries me every single day. I live right near Withrow High School, and every time there's an ambulance in the morning or in the afternoon, I'm assuming that it's getting kids. There's not enough people monitoring. The police are not out there monitoring. They don't have crossing guards. They have security, but they're busy sometimes doing other things. There are bus stops with kids, over 100 deep standing on the sidewalk. Right now, it's light and warm. It's not raining, it's not snowing, it's not icy, it's not dark. But soon, as we lose daylight savings time, those kids are going to be there in the dark on the way to school and on the way home from school. Teachers, you don't understand, like a school day is so like down to the minute schedule. So they're figuring out they don't even have a way to have staff meetings because everybody's all hands on deck. They're wanting to have staff meetings an hour after the end of the school day. Well, teachers have families and other obligations. They have to try to go get their own kids because their own kids are in these same messes. But it's worrisome to me that we are going to have a loss of instructional time. Kids are coming to all of the high schools. They're missing bell 1, some of them are missing bell 2 because the buses didn't show up. Our kids should not have to work that hard just to get to school. There is no other district where kids have to fight to get to school. And how many days are they going to fight to get to school before they say, I'm going to quit? I'm worried about our high school graduation rates. I'm worried about our dropout rates. I'm worried about kids getting credits that they need to graduate because they're missing so many bells. Teachers are worried and concerned. I'm hearing it from every single high school. There is not a high school in the city that I feel at this point is safe enough for kids to be entering or exiting the building. And I don't understand how you have people who are in leadership in the city and the county who are ignoring it. And I don't understand even how our own school board is acting as if it's all okay and painting it as a rosy picture. I have teachers sending me pictures and parents sending me pictures every day, and it's not a rosy picture. We should not be saying it's joyful, they'll work it out. It's not.
Yeah, with all due respect, Millers, I would ask that you not disparage our school board and make statements that I believe are unfounded, especially to our own audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. But I think it's okay in the elementary schools. There are bus transportation problems in the elementary. Completely. Every year there's problems with the yellow buses. There's not enough buses for our kids to get on so that they can get home in a reasonable amount of time. We have kids who are walking a mile just to get to a bus stop. And they're walking through intersections that say caution, not safe for walking. But yet we're putting our kids who are 11, 12 years old to walk through those intersections alone. Our families don't have the resources to be able to drive and carpool. It's $600 for kids to take a driver's training just to be able to get their license. Our families can't afford that. And they don't have cars, they don't have insurance. And so who are we leaving behind? Not the families who can carpool.
Thanks, Julie.
But I believe that the contract is not as weak as what district may believe or believe. I don't think it's as strong for SORTA as what some people from SORTA and Metro believe. We went through the contract and we found all kinds of areas where I think there are weaknesses that show that they need to be providing these routes, and I can if you would like a copy.
Pass it out when people can read it. I appreciate you stating all of that, Julie. As we don't have to discuss transportation right now, if I could, since we're at the end of the meeting, so to speak, under other, if it would be okay, just a quick update on the superintendent search.
Make one
Sure.
comment. I think obviously it's a terrible situation, and I really do hope that more action is taken. But I think a longer-term thing for this body and our internal audit team, are we really auditing decision authority when we're also auditing, were things paid as they were supposed to pay, and is the budget accurate? I mean, I think that obviously a big risk area is that someone was operating outside of his decision authority, but I don't know that that's formally defined. Do we have clear decision authority outlined of scopes of decision, not only for budget, but impact? And if not, that would, to me, be a recommendation, I guess.
I think that makes perfect sense. We do know the person we're talking about, his contract has been suspended. But also, again, there is a need for an actual organizational chart for this district. We do not have a serious one or a detailed one, and I know that the administration is working on that because it's pretty hard to attract a new superintendent or the current internal person or others. When you're trying to attract somebody to the district and you don't really have an organizational chart to show as to how things are. But I do think that, Christine, I think that's absolutely correct. Regarding the whole decision scope and auditing for that. For the superintendent search, we have completed the outreach and for the RFP to find a professional executive search group, and 9 groups from all over the country applied, which is more than we've gotten in the last 2 times we've had to do it. There's a great diversity and variety of them, and the board is in the process of narrowing it down with the hopes that perhaps as early after public discussion on the 1st, we will be able to hopefully have a professional executive search group named, and before September 13th meeting. So the aim is to do it the 1st, but we still have that to be current with our timeline. We can still do it as late as September 13th. But there will be a search firm in place before the mid part of September. Any questions about the superintendent search?
Okay. Thank you for the update, Ms. Holden. And if there is no other business for the audit committee, then we will adjourn the meeting. And we hope to see everyone in person on Wednesday, October 27th at 4:30 for our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Lauren, are you able to send that document that Ms. Sellers handed out in an email so we can look at that? Thank you.
Good.